Slide. Text. Odds Seminar Series, Whole Person Health and the Nutrition Continuum. 2025-06-25. 1500 hours UTC. Recorded automatically. Microsoft Teams. Slide. Text. Office of Dietary Supplements Seminar Series. ods.od.nih.gov. National Institutes of Health, Office of Dietary Supplements. Helene Langevin and Barbara Sorkin appear.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to go off camera in a minute because my Wi-Fi is having trouble handling both the image and my voice. So I want to start by welcoming everyone to today's NIH Office of Dietary Supplements webinar. I'm Barbara Sorkin. I co-direct NIH's Consortium Advancing Research on Botanicals and Other Natural Products, as well as I have been organizing this seminar series. So a few brief announcements before I introduce today's eminent speaker. First, with apologies if you're all a bit over having changes announced, but this one I think is a good change. In the fall, when the ODS seminars resume after our summer vacation, you will see a new younger face introducing the ODS seminars. My ODS colleague, Dr. Jasmine Hayes, will be the new breath of fresh air. I know she's going to have some exciting speakers for you in the fall. And if you have some great ideas for ODS speakers, please let her know, Jasmine Hayes at ODS. And if you want to make sure that you're the first to know who's giving those talks and when, please send an email to that effect to the email address that we'll be adding to the chat. You should have an icon for that near the top of your screen. And you will also see it on the next slide.
Slide. Text. Odds Event Guidelines. https://ods.od.nih.gov/about/ods_event_guidelines.spx. Attendees are expected to uphold the professional and educational purposes of meetings by respecting the rights, views, privacy, safety, and dignity of all people in their speech, postings, and other actions. Keep all comments relevant to the event topic. Refrain from engaging in harassing speech or other inappropriate behavior, posting insulting, obscene, discriminatory, or threatening comments, disrupting the conversation, including with spam or repetitive posts. Use of OWL-based or OWL-assisted note takers. If you see or experience a violation of these guidelines, please contact odds@nih.gov or send a private message to the meeting host. Participants who engage in any of these behaviors will be given a warning from event organizers, asked to stop the behavior, and be expected to stop immediately. Participants who continue to display inappropriate behavior after being given such a warning will be removed from the event.
So, in the interest of audio quality, and because these are the professional behaviors that we require of all participants in our ODS seminars, showing you these. You've all been muted on entry, and we ask that you please stay muted until the final questions and answers. You do have access to the chat, and we encourage you to put your questions for our speaker in the chat as they arise. If I see any that seem urgent, I'll try to get her attention to ask them. Otherwise, we'll take as many as we can fit at the end of her presentation. And please also use the chat if you're having technical problems with the webinar, audio or visual or the closed captions. And one of us at the NIH end will try to help. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Helene Langevin is the director of the NIH's National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, or NCCIH. And she is going to discuss the nutrition continuum and its relationship to whole person health today. A few words about Dr. Langevin. She received her medical degree from McGill University, Montreal, completed a postdoctoral research fellowship in neurochemistry at the Medical Research Council's Neurochemical Pharmacology Unit in Cambridge, England, and did a residency in internal medicine and a fellowship in endocrinology and metabolism at Johns Hopkins. As a professor of neurological sciences at the University of Vermont Larner College of Medicine, and then as director of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine, which is jointly based at Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Harvard Medical School, from 2012 to 2018, her research interests centered around the role of connective tissue in chronic musculoskeletal pain and the mechanisms of action of acupuncture and manual and movement-based therapies. Dr. Langevin came to the NIH as the director of NCCIH in 2018. And with that, let me stop sharing my slides. Where is the stop share button?
So move your mouse to the top of the screen and you should be able to have controls pop out, or
I still see share button, James.
I think if we want to just let Helen go ahead and
Share her
start
slide?
sharing, she'll take over.
Slide. Text. Whole Person Health and the Nutrition Continuum. Helene Langevin, MD. Director, NCCIH.
Okay, so Elaine, apologies for that glitch. There we go.
Yep.
We will let you know if we're having any trouble hearing you.
Okay, does this work? Can you see
It sure
my
does.
slide?
Yes.
Okay,
Do you want to go to presenter there?
Presentation. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Looks good.
Really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this wonderful seminar from that ODS has been holding for such a long time, and glad. I mean, I'm sorry that this is going to be your last one, Barbara. We'll try to make it.
What a bang of way for me to finish. Thank you.
So I'll be talking about whole person health and the nutrition continuum. And just to give you first of an idea of what do we mean by these terms. So let me see if I can advance my slides now. Whoops.
Slide. There are two stick figures, one that is anatomical, with the heart, lungs, brain, gut, leg muscles, arm muscles, and stomach drawn. There are 4 pill bottles, one pointing to the heart, one to the stomach, one to the gut, and one to the legs. Above is text, healthy, less healthy, disease. A red right pointing arrow points to less healthy, and a red arrow after less healthy points right to disease. A dashed green arrow points from disease to less healthy, and another green arrow points from less healthy to healthy.
There we go. First of all, what about whole person health? What do we mean by that? What we contrast the whole person health approach to sort of the conventional approach that we have to treating diseases, where we treat a disease usually once it's diagnosed, and typically these diseases are diagnosed one organ or system at a time, and they're treated with a combination of medication, sometimes surgery, but they're really treated in a separate fashion.
A box appears with text, chronic stress, poor sleep, poor diet, sedentary lifestyle. Chronic stress is linked to the brain, heart, and stomach on the stick figure. Poor sleep is linked to the leg muscles, the stomach, and the heart. Poor diet is linked to the heart, the stomach, and the leg muscles. Sedentary lifestyle is linked to the leg and arm muscles. A green arrow points to the left from the box to the other stick figure with text, psychological, nutritional, physical. Above the arrow is text, self-care. Below it is text, multi-component interventions.
And in contrast to that, the concept of whole person health recognizes that there's a path going between health and disease that goes through these sort of intermediary states where there are opportunities along the way to restore health if we pay attention to a lot of the predisposing factors that can lead to disease, including poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, and importantly, chronic stress and poor sleep. And by paying attention to all of these, we need to really understand better how to apply a combination of self-care and multi-component non-pharmacological interventions, including psychological, nutritional, physical approaches to restore health. That's the idea behind whole person health.
Slide. Several boxes are shown along a continuum with 2 triangles, one on each side, joined together. The left triangle is labeled health, and the right triangle is labeled disease. The first box is labeled individual with text, biological, behavioral, social, environmental. The next box is labeled family, the third box community, the fourth box population, and the fifth box planet.
So, of course, the other important thing about this is that we're not really thinking about people as individuals isolated from their surrounding environment, right? A person's social and physical environment play a big role in this. The other thing is that, and so there's a link between, the what we call the biological, behavioral, social, and environmental components of whole person health. The same thing, and what I'm going to talk about, linking this to what we call the nutritional continuum, is that the health of an individual is very much linked to the health of the community that they live in, as well as extending this all the way to the whole population and eventually to the planet. We really understand now more and more that all of these components of health are linked together. So let's see. No, it's not advanced.
Slide. Text. A broader perspective on nutrition research. The rationale for integrating the entire continuum of human nutrition. Andrew A. Bremer, Shannon N. Zank, Stephen M. Paciakos, Helene M. Langevin. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. A journal of the American Society for Nutrition. Several circles appear in a row with graphics. The first has a picture of a plant growing, the next has a picture of produce in pallets in front of a store, the next has a picture of a parent and child cooking together with vegetables, the next has a picture of a fork poking into a salad, the next has a picture of a grape bunch, and the last has a picture of a molecular structure with one end labeled HO and two other ends labeled OH. There is a QR code in the bottom right.
Okay. This leads us to this idea of the nutrition continuum. And I was really very fortunate and happy to be able to have this wonderful collaboration with the leadership of the Office of Nutrition Research, Office of Dietary Supplements, the Office, the National Institute of Nursing Research, and NCCIH all work together to publish a paper recently in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition called A Broader Perspective on Nutrition Research, Integrating the Entire Continuum of Human Nutrition. So this is what I'm going to talk about. How does this concept of the nutrition continuum relate to the concept of whole person health? Some of it is intuitive, but some of this requires digging a little bit into.
Slide. Text. Office of Nutrition Research Strategic Plan. In this strategic plan, ONR outlines a vision that considers nutrition as central to whole person health from the first to last days of life, as well as across generations. A QR code appears in the bottom left. On the right-hand side is a picture of a circle with a piece cut out. In the circle is a picture of spices arranged into Earth's continents with various vegetables surrounding. In a semicircle surrounding that circle, there is a picture of a solar panel in a field, several fruits and veggies, meats, eggs, milk, and nuts and legumes. Text. 2026 to 2030 fiscal years.
So the other thing that is very exciting to us is to see the recent release of this wonderful strategic plan from the Office of Nutrition Research that really essentially makes this link. ONR outlines a vision that considers nutrition as central to the whole person health from the first to last days of life, as well as across generations. So you can see that a lot of us at NIH are really thinking alike. And this is great because it means that we can really collaborate very in ways that are very exciting.
Slide. Text. The nutritional continuum in health, environmental, social, behavioral and biological. Several pictures appear in a row. The first shows a large garden outside of a house with text, access to unprocessed food, agriculture practices. The second picture shows a woman preparing food in her kitchen with text, nutrition and cooking literacy. The next picture shows a family seated around a table eating with text, social and behavioral aspects are eating, mindful eating. The next picture shows a bowl with pasta with text, balanced diets. The next picture shows several blueberries with text, dietary components. The next picture shows various bacteria with text, probiotics, prebiotics. The last two pictures show a jar with herbs and a bowl of a spice with text, dietary herbs and spices.
So what about this nutrition continuum? This would be the sort of what we would aspire to, right? Where we would have health that would be on a continuum from health of the soil, for example, health of agricultural practices that promote and the health of the environment, of the planet, to also applying this so that people and their families and their communities can eat healthy food. We know a lot about what is a healthy diet, what is a balanced diet, but the difficulty is how do you help people to achieve that from knowing, understanding, learning how to cook, from practicing what we call mindful eating, which is helping people to really pay attention to what they're eating and to understand how best to give people advice about what should be on their plate and what are the components of the diet that are maximally beneficial to us. all the way down to what these components of those foods are, down to individual components, including things like probiotics or dietary herbs or other types of components of the food.
Slide. Several pictures are shown in a row. The first shows a drone over a crop field with a pesticide cloud over the crops, with text, overuse of fertilizers, herbicides and pesticides. The next shows several chickens packed together in cages with text, mass-produced farming. The next shows a convenience store with text, food deserts. The next shows a fast food restaurant with text, fast food. The next shows a man eating a burger with text, food addiction craving. The next shows candy and fries with text, calorie-dense nutrient-poor diet. The last shows shelves with several supplements with text, dietary supplements used instead of food.
Unfortunately, this is what we see in real life. The situation right now is very dire. We really do not have a very healthy and food continuum in general. This has very clearly been very highlighted very eloquently by the HHS administration and the problem that we're having right now with an unhealthy food. A lot of the food that are available for people to eat are not optimally promoting health. What does that mean? It means that we often use agricultural practices that deplete the soil, that overuse fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, mass-produced farming, food deserts where people do not have access to healthy foods. A lot of times in some people's main access, especially in rural areas, they do not have even access to fresh produce. Fast food, which is really taking over how people are less and less people are cooking for themselves, just basically grab what they can find, and food that is addictive and in itself create and maintains a cycle of food addiction, craving, calorie dense, nutrient poor food, and unfortunately using dietary supplements instead of food. This is a pattern that is very prevalent.
A red line appears around the first picture.
So what can we do about that? So let's first look at our understanding about about how we grow our food.
Slide. Text, flavonoids and resilience, from plants to humans. The first picture shows a plant with leaves and roots, with arrows pointing up from both. On the left-hand side is text, stress. A box underneath lists several items. Text, UV radiation, extreme temperatures, drought, salinity, heavy metals, xenobiotics. There are all labeled oxidative stress. In a separate box at the bottom is text, nutrient scarcity. On the right-hand side of the picture is text, plant response. Beneath this is a molecular structure. Beneath that is text, upregulation of flavonoid biosynthesis. Below that is a box with a list of items. Text, ROS scavenging, metal chelation, increased nutrient bioavailability, modulation of auxin transport. Source, Kitty et al. Microorganisms, 2022. On the right-hand side of the slide is text, flavonoids. Beneath it is molecular structure, and beneath the molecular structure is a picture of dark chocolate, a grape bunch, an apple, strawberries, and blueberries. These all point to 4 pictures on the right-hand side. The top one is labeled vascular function, with an arrow pointing up. A box shows that flavonoids lower vasodilation, arterial stiffness, and blood pressure. The next picture is labeled lipid metabolism, with an arrow pointing down, and shows an anatomical picture of a person's torso. 2 boxes show that flavonoids lower LDL-C, raise HDL-C, lower triglycerides, and raise microbiota amount and composition. Flavonoids raise intestinal microbiota. The third picture shows a red blood cell and a white blood cell in plasma. It is labeled inflammation, with an arrow pointing down. A box shows that flavonoids lower inflammatory biomarkers. The last picture shows chromosomes and is labeled aging, with an arrow pointing down. A box shows that flavonoids increase telomere length. Source, Engler et al. MedEnSci 2020.
So we're starting to understand that there are some components of foods that are very important and that are relevant to not only how healthy the food, the plants are when they grow, but also how healthy humans are when they consume the food. And a great example of this is some flavonoid components of plants that we know are linked to oxidative stress. When a plant is under stress, either because they're undergoing a drought or there's not enough nutrients in the soil that they consume, that they're planted in. What the plant does in response to that is it synthesizes components that help the plant to overcome these oxidative stresses. And we know that these same flavonoids, when ingested by humans, can have effects on many aspects of health, including immune function, lipid metabolism, etc., and may be important in aging.
Slide text impact of soil and gut microbes on the metabolism of flavonoids across the nutrition continuum. A picture shows a magnifying glass over a molecular structure with multiple OHs, HOs, NOs in a picture with a plant and its roots, arrows pointing back and forth from the roots to several microbes in the soil, rain falling from a cloud, the sun shining, a cow, and a pile of manure. The pictures of the garden, a woman prepping a meal, a family seated around a table, a bowl of pasta, and blueberries reappear. Next are pictures of a molecular structure, a liver, another molecular structure, a brain, and a close-up of a vein with small roundish objects surrounding it.
What is also important to realize is that the interaction of both at the level of the soil and at the level of the humans involve in dealing with these flavonoids involve interaction with microbes. So when the plant is grown in an environment where the microbe constitution of the soil is healthy, that essentially kind of helps the plant to synthesize the flavonoids. And the same thing some of these same flavonoids that we ingest in our gut, we need the bacteria in the gut to break down those molecules into components that can then be metabolized and utilized, and we know that they can have an effect on the brain and on metabolism. So paying attention to the soil in which the plants are growing can have effects that are parallel to those that from a microbial standpoint to those that are going on in our bodies.
Slide text regenerative agriculture practices can strengthen connections between the planet, soil, food and people. 3 pictures appear in a row. The first shows women with buckets standing around crops. The next shows a person with 2 handfuls of soil. The last picture shows a crop field with 3 bubbles with graphic of a satellite dish and raindrops, the next with a graphic of check marks and a plant, and the last with a picture of the earth with 2 arrows surrounding it and stripes. Source: https://www.regrow.egg/post/using-soil-data-to-scale-regenerative-agriculture.
And so this is important because we know that when we utilize what's called the regenerative agriculture practices, where not only are returning carbon to the soil in the form of organic fertilizer, that not only brings carbon back to the soil, which is an important source of avoiding capture carbon from being into the atmosphere, but also returning microbes to the soil at the same time. And so really understanding how best agricultural practices can evolve in such a way that they can support health of both the planet as well as people is something that's extremely important that we all need to do. And we recognizing that link is extremely important.
The slide with pictures of a negative continuum reappears, with food deserts and fast food circled.
So let's now move on to what happens once the food is actually produced and how it accesses people. And I talked about not only buying the food, but also preparing it and understanding and having the knowledge of how to do that. A lot of times in this day and age, a lot of people grew up in environments where they didn't learn how to cook in their homes because either both parents were working and there was not food being grown in the home. And so there's a whole generation of people in this country who are adults now who don't know how to cook.
Slide text Healthy Teaching Kitchen Program. U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. A picture shows a woman prepping a meal in a kitchen. Several circles appear in a row with graphics. The first has a picture of a plant growing, the next has a picture of produce in pallets in front of a store, the next has a picture of a parent and child cooking together with vegetables, the next has a picture of a fork poking into a salad, the next has a picture of a grape bunch, and the last has a picture of a molecular structure with one end labeled HO and two other ends labeled OH. At the bottom is text, Teaching Kitchen Collaborative, with a picture of a radish, a knife, and a torch.
And this is what some of these programs are addressing. At the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, there's a Healthy Teaching Kitchen program, and also the Teaching Kitchen Collaborative, which is a network of teaching kitchens that are distributed in places like community centers, schools, hospitals, etc. It's literally teach people how to cook. This is an essential skill. If people don't know how to cook, they're not going to be able to buy the produce, know what to buy, know how to prepare it in ways that are affordable and to improve their diets.
Slide. An article from Health Education Journal appears with title, Interactive Cooking Lessons Improve Attitudes Towards Food and Weight Statuses Among Preschool Children. 025. Volume 84, 2, 135-145. Sarah Lemme Russell, Tiffany Rowell, Namali Fernando, Heidi Eugenio, Melanie Potok, Andy Chilson, Eliza Goldstein, Crystal Jennings, and Nancy Zucker. A graph from the article appears on the right-hand side with the vertical axis labeled Estimated Change in BMI Percentile, ranging from -20 to 30. There are three categories along the horizontal axis, which is labeled Baseline Weight Status, Healthy Weight, Low Weight, and High Weight. There is a 3.2% change for healthy weight, a 24.7% change for low weight, and a -16.9% change for high weight. Below the graph is text, Figure 1. Change in weight status from baseline to end of year. The mean BMI percentile increased by 3.2, plus or minus 29.4, among children with healthy weight at baseline. Compared to children with healthy weight, those with low weight gained 24.7 percentile points over the course of the school year. Conversely, those with high weight lost 16.9 percentile points over the year.
So there are some evidence that this is actually beneficial here. Here's a study that was published just very recently about interacting cooking lessons to improve attitudes toward food and weight in children. So this is teaching kids how to cook in schools. Very importantly, this study needs to be followed up by. This was not a randomized study, but it points out something that's really important, is that the children who at baseline had a healthy weight their weight did not change during the intervention, but kids who weight was low, was not at a healthy weight, was too low, they gained weight, and those whose weight was high lost weight. And so it suggests that this is something that can be beneficial. We pay a lot of attention to children who are overweight, but there's also a lot of children who have eating problems, who are either fussy eaters or not eating a variety of food, only eat 2 or 3 things. As a parent of a fussy eater herself, my daughter, when she was young, had that problem. And this is a problem to eat a balanced diet when the kids will only eat the 2 or 3 things. And they found that this program improved that.
Slide. Another article appears with title, The Effect of Food Prescription Programs on Chronic Disease Management in Primarily Low-Income Populations, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. Alison Haslam, Jennifer Gill, Tori Taniguchi, Charlotte Love, Valerie Bluebird-Jernigan. Nutritional Health 2022 September 28, 389-400, DOI 10.1177/02601060211070718. On the right-hand side are 4 box plot charts. The first is labeled Hemoglobin A1C. It shows a negative trend. The second is labeled Body Mass Index and shows a negative trend. A red box appears around this chart. The next is labeled Daily Servings F&V and shows a positive trend overall, and this too has a red box around it. The last is labeled Systolic Blood Pressure and shows a negative overall trend.
Here's another aspect of food delivery is a food prescription program. This is now increasingly, there's the issue, the concept of social prescribing is gaining a lot of traction. A lot of it is overseas in places like Great Britain, United Kingdom, and in other European countries. But it's starting to get some attention here in the US as well. This is a food prescription program where primarily in low-income population, where they did a systematic review of studies that looked at that and found that there were significant changes in improvements in body mass index, as well as what people were actually eating, the daily servings of fruit and vegetables. When these food delivery programs where fresh fruit and produce was delivered to the homes, getting around people who either don't have the time, if they're working 2 jobs, for example, they don't have time to go. Grocery stores maybe that sell fruit and vegetables may be far away, they can't access them, or sometimes missing altogether. You can see here that there were trends towards improvements in hemoglobin A1C and systolic blood pressure, but they were not statistically significant. The duration of this intervention was relatively short, so they was generally measured in weeks to months. So it's important to think about what would this be like on the long term.
Slide. An article from Journal of the American Heart Association appears with title, Original Research, Health and Economic Impacts of Implementing Produce Prescription Programs for Diabetes in the United States, a Microsimulation Study. Lu Wang, Ph.D., Brianna and Lauren, M.S., Kurt Hager, Ph.D., Fang Zhang, M.D., Ph.D., John B. Wong, M.D., David D. Kim, Ph.D., Dariush Mazaflarian, M.D., Dr. Penthouse. On the right side is a table with text, Table 2. Estimated health gains, costs, and cost-effectiveness of a national produce prescription program at 5 years, 10 years, and over a lifetime. There are several columns. The first is labeled Outcome, the next is labeled Over 5 years, with sub-items Estimated change with policy, and 95% UI. The next is labeled Over 10 years with sub-items Estimated change with policy, and 95% UI. The last is labeled Over lifetime mean equals 25 years with sub-items Estimated change policy, and 95% UI. The last 2 outcomes under category cost effectiveness have red boxes around them. Text, ICER, healthcare perspective $ per QALY. The amount for over lifetime has a red box around it, text, 18,100. The last outcome is ICER, societal perspective $ per QALY. For over lifetime, it states text, cost saving. Text, accounting for the food and administrative costs of the program resulted in an estimated $18,100 per QALY compares favorably with medications used for primary prevention, e.g. $37,000 per QALY for statins.
So here's another aspect of this, which is looked at the health and economic impact over a longer period of time, where they estimated, this is a simulation study, but they looked over a lifetime of what it would cost to do this. To essentially prescribe, deliver food to the homes of people who are in low in economic, status. And what they found is that accounting for the cost and the administrative cost of this program, they calculated these quality life adjustment years of how much it would cost, and $18,000 over the course of the lifetime is what it would cost. And if you compare that, and this is generally considered cost effective, because if you compare to a medication, for example, a statin, for example, for primary prevention, you can see that the cost of that is $37,000, a lot more expensive, even though statins are not particularly expensive drugs. So, so you can see that this is something that we need to think about in terms of helping people to eat better food.
The negative continuum slide reappears, with food addiction craving highlighted.
So now what about the food eating behavior itself? This is really, really important. We know now that there are aspects of food behavior that is very much beyond our conscious control.
Slide. 3 images of brains appear. The top image shows the midsection of a brain highlighted. It is labeled mesolimbic. The bottom left shows the brainstem and lower portion of the brain highlighted. This is labeled autonomic vegetative. The bottom right image shows the top of the brain and the areas surrounding the other 2 parts highlighted. It is labeled neocortical.
And this goes back to the what we call this 3 different aspects of the brain, right? The automatic, autonomic or vegetative brain, the mesolimbic or sort of more sort of emotionally driven brain. And then the neocortex, which has to do with more our intentional behavior.
Over the mesolimbic brain appears text, motivation, reward, dopamine circuits, stress response, stress eating behavior, food addiction craving, reward-based eating behavior. Over the autonomic vegetative brain appears text, hypothalamus, interoception hunger/satiety, hunger-based eating behavior. Over the neocortical brain appears text, intentional mindful eating behavior, executive function.
And food eating behavior follows very much this pattern. You can see that hunger-based eating behavior that you find in any animal, for example, involves the feeling of being hungry, a sensation which we're very much getting interested in from the point of view of neurosciences is interoception, your ability to perceive the signals from within your organs that tells you whether you're thirsty or hungry or tired or whatever. And then the hypothalamus, which is essentially, drives all of this and integrates this with the autonomic nervous system. And then the mesolimbic system, which is the reward systems in the brain that motivates, for example, an animal to go get food. A lot of times, this involves behavior that can be stressful or dangerous. So the animal needs to be motivated, right, to do this. And so this is very much tied to this kind of reward-based behavior that involves dopamine circuits and that are very much involved in our stress response. And then finally, there's this sort of more evolved sort of neocortical executive function that we call that really can override a lot of these sort of more emotional driven behaviors and automatic behaviors through intention. And this is where this concept of mindful eating behavior comes from.
An arrow points to the text under mesolimbic with text, social/environmental stressors, ultra-processed food, food advertising.
So what about the influences of our social environment and on this? Well, we know, right, that environmental stressors and especially there's a lot of attention paid by these days to the effect of ultra-processed foods and food advertising on what people will put in their mouth and eat. And we all know that this is playing a huge factor.
Text appears, text, stress management, CBT, mindful eating. These point to executive function, to motivation/reward dopamine circuits, and to hypothalamus, interoception hunger/satiety. There also appears text, GLP-1 agonists, which points to text, long-term effects, ? It also points to motivation/reward dopamine circuits, and hypothalamus.
And now we're also having these very, very fascinating new drugs that are developed, the GLP-1 agonists. These are the drugs that have an effect on not only our appetite, weight reduction, but also we're finding that these drugs have an effect on all kinds of other types of cravings that involve these sort of dopamine circuits, different types of addictions, for example. And these drugs are being investigated and to see how they can help. But importantly, we don't know the long-term effects of drugs like this, especially if they are administered to growing children or adolescents. And at the other end of the spectrum, we know that there are methods that we have that are well established for managing stress and for improving our sensations, our response to internally driven sensations such as hunger, such as our sensations of being under stress. And so cognitive behavior therapy, for example, is something that we know we can utilize our executive function and our emotion regulation to basically manage some of the stresses that we have. So I think that at both that, clearly the drugs, the GLP-1 agonist drugs are going to play a very important role in the sort of obesity crisis that we're having in this country, but they're not the only thing that we should be obviously looking at. I think it's very important that we really understand how best to use these non-pharmacological methods as well.
The negative continuum slide reappears. The last item, dietary supplements used instead of food, is highlighted.
Let's now move on to dietary supplements and this issue of what is the optimal use of dietary supplements? And certainly they should not, we know very clearly that we should not be using them instead of food. And unfortunately, this happens all too often. And the problem we're having, it is very difficult for us to even understand and know how dietary supplements are being used.
Slide Text, multiple challenges in assessing dietary supplement intake. Several pictures of different supplements appear, with vitamin D3 plus K, elderberry drops, ginger root, testiferm, vitamin B12, an immunity support supplement, a hair vitamin supplement, sleep harmony, vitamin D2, CoQ10, multi-collagen, keto, turmeric and ginger, orange ketones, pre-workout for men, and magic mushrooms all shown.
It's not a secret that assessing the dietary supplement intake is extremely challenging. If you did a dietary recall and asked people what type of supplements they take, a lot of times people will not even be able to describe what the supplement is. In order to really understand what it is that people are taking, you need to actually look at what is on the labels of some of these multitudes of different supplements that are available to people, and the doses are all over the place. Some of these supplements, even simple vitamins, are sold in massive doses that are way beyond the recommended dietary allowance. And we have no idea what this is all doing to people's diets.
Slide. Text, adding dietary supplement intake to existing digital dietary assessment tool. A screenshot of the AS824 website appears with text, report a meal or a snack. There is a drop-down to select a meal or a snack type, with breakfast chosen. Text, day of the breakfast, Monday, March 30th. Time of the breakfast is set to 11 a.m. There is also a drop-down to choose the location. Text, step 1, report a meal or snack. Examples of meals include breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Also, tell us about snacks and drinks between meals. National Cancer Institute. Automated self-administered 24-hour dietary assessment tool. AS824.
So fortunately, there's now an effort at NIH that is well underway to adding dietary supplement intake assessment to existing digital dietary assessment tools. And this is the ASA24, which is a automated self-administered 24-hour dietary recall, which is you can do from your phone or computer. And right now, this is for food, but it is being adapted for dietary supplements. So we're really excited about this. Might hopefully include even pictures of the pill bottles, so that dietary supplement bottles, so that this and analysis using AI and to really be able to get a sense of not just what people are taking, but how much they are taking.
Slide. Text, the nutritional continuum in health, environmental, social, behavioral and biological. The nutritional continuum reappears. Highlighted are pictures of medicinal plants, a molecular structure labeled bioactive isolated compounds, and pills labeled drugs derived from natural products. To the left of this text, precision nutrition, food as medicine, medically tailored meals.
And now finally, I'm going to move on to this other category of sort of food-related components, which is what we call the bioactive compounds that are contained in food. And this is important because we've known, this has been known for millennia, right? That some plants, some food components, mainly plants, but not exclusively plants, are being used for their medicinal properties. And a lot of research on botanicals and natural products that we fund at NCCIH is really geared towards understanding that. A lot of these medicinal plants that have been traditionally used are a lot of times, the traditional use is to use them in, for example, in teas or decoctions. But increasingly, there's an effort to understand the compounds that are contained in these preparations and what is the actual ingredient. And a lot of times what can happen is that once an isolated ingredient is identified and understood, some drugs can be derived from these natural products. And of course, a lot of drugs that we know, from the very simple drugs that have been used for decades, are natural product. Aspirin is a great example of that. Acetylsalicylic acid, one of the drugs that we use the most, and even opiates or many other drugs are derived from natural products. So but what about how should this type of research be conducted in order to derive the maximal benefit from these
Slide. Text, pharmacological research model. Bullets, single target, pharmacological dose, immediate/short-term effects.
Elaine, we just lost your voice.
Okay, it happened. We
Okay,
were
but we
worried
got
about
you
this.
back in
Okay,
time.
it's back now, right? Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so let's look at the predominant model that we use when we do research, not just on botanicals, but on any kind of medical research. A very, very predominant model is that when we are trying to understand how a given compound can be used therapeutically, we look, for example, as what is the target? We look for a molecular target. We look for a dose that can reliably induce modification of the target. And typically, we increase the dose until we find an effect that is reliable, that can be measured. And the effects that we look at are typically measured in short-term effects. They're not effects that are measured over years and decades, right? They're effects that are measured over days or weeks or months.
More text appears. Text, whole person health research model. Bullets, multi-system effects, low dose, longer-term adaptive/protective/preventive effects.
So in contrast to that, the whole person health research model is different. It instead of looking at a single target from a drug, we consider that there a specific food or a specific component of a food or a specific other type of non-pharmacological intervention, such as exercise or stress management, may have effects on multiple different systems. It's not just effect on one target. The other important consideration is that sometimes the dose of the compounds or the interventions that we are doing may be important, and sometimes a low dose can have a different effect from a high dose, and we need to understand that. And finally, the types of effects that we are looking for may be on a different time frame. They may be longer term, they may be adaptive or protective or preventive, as opposed to short-term effects such as, for example, analgesia, right? Giving an analgesic for pain typically reduces pain for a short period of time. Once the analgesic wears off, the pain comes back. Whereas if you're looking at a longer-term effect, which will help resolve the pain, and then such the pain goes away essentially, then the analgesic is no longer needed.
Multi-system effects is highlighted.
So this is the difference. Okay, so let's first look at these multi-system effects.
Slide. The two stick figures from earlier reappear, with the regular stick figure on the left labeled healthier state, and the figure with the anatomical parts showing on the right, labeled less healthy states. A red arrow points to less healthy state. A network of red and blue lines appears in between the figures. Above it is text, poor diet, sedentary lifestyle.
So imagine that you have an individual that has a poor diet and a sedentary lifestyle. And just imagine that you could look at the entire metabolic network of this individual, and yet you could represent it with this sort of stick diagram here in the middle. And the blue represents the healthy state, and the red represents the less healthy state. Okay. And imagine that you could see that this red metabolic network has sort of shifted from healthy to less healthy. And it's a complex thing. It's just not just one thing.
Two black dots appear, one at the end of a blue line and one at the end of a red line.
But then this person goes to the doctor, and then the doctor decides, okay, well, let's measure something. Let's measure your triglycerides, okay? And you can see that in this case, the person's triglycerides are elevated. And use this as a biomarker and say, you have problems with your lipids. Let's start a medication that will help.
A pill bottle appears by the figure on the right, connected to the stomach.
And so the patient is started on a medication.
The black dot on the end of the red line shifts red lines around, moving close to the black dot on the end of the blue line.
And lo and behold, they go back to the doctor 6 months later, and their triglycerides are back to almost normal, which is great, wonderful. But what you don't see here, because you don't have the ability to look at the entire metabolic network, you can see that some other things have happened, that this network has sort of distorted, and to accommodate this change in the triglycerides. And what we know about statins, for example, is that they have an effect on the pattern on the entire pathway of cholesterol biosynthesis that involves HNG-CoA reductase. And this is a pattern that doesn't control just cholesterol, it controls many other things, including ubiquitin. I always have a problem with this word, ubiquitization. I can never say this word, I'm sorry. Of proteins, essentially this very important pathway that involves very, very fundamental aspects of metabolism. So for a long time, people have wondered about that, but it's never been able to pinpoint. A lot of times people who are starting on statins, for example, have problems with myalgias, muscle aches.
Slide. An article from the Journal of Applied Physiology appears with a chart. Title: Atorvastatin treatment reduces exercise capacities in rats, involvement of mitochondrial impairments and oxidative stress. Jamal Bouetber and Laure Charles, Lawrence Rassener, Stéphane Dufour, François Pickard, Bernard Genie, and Geoffrey Zold. Text, first published August 18, 2011. The chart has a vertical axis labeled Vmax, in parentheses micromoles oxygen per min per GDW, with a range from 0 to 20. There are 4 bars, the first labeled CONT, which goes almost to 15, the next labeled ATO, which is slightly above 10, the next CONT plus EXE, going over 15, and the last ATO plus EXE, at slightly above 10. A line between ATO plus EXE and CONT is labeled with 2 stars. A line between CONT and CONT plus EXE is labeled with 1 star. A line between CONT and ATO is labeled 2 stars. A line between ATO and CONT plus EXE is labeled with 3 stars. A line between CONT plus EXE is labeled with 3 stars.
But it's never been really pinned down as to muscle aches are so common that it's very hard to sort of tell whether the statin is doing it. When you compare it to placebo, you don't really see a difference. But there's been a concern about this for decades in the literature. And here's a relatively not so recent, but 2011 study in animals where they looked at the effect of a statin, in this case atorvastatin, on rats that were exercising. You can see that the controls here with exercise, which is the black bar, improve their mitochondrial function, and but the atorvastatin reduced it. And when you looked at the effect of exercise in the presence of the statin, it was essentially wiped out. So that when these rats were exercising in the presence of the statin, their mitochondria were no longer gaining in their oxygen capacity. Now, this is worrisome in a sense that you might be, by taking a statin, you might be robbing yourself of the benefit of exercising. So is this true in humans? Now, we don't know the answer to this.
Slide. An article appears with title, Investigating the Combined Effects of Statins and Exercise on Skeletal Muscle Mitochondrial Content and Function, Cardiorespiratory Fitness and Quality of Life in Individuals with Dyslipidemia, Protocol for a Randomized Placebo-Controlled Trial. An infographic shows patients with dyslipidemia N equals 100 on the left. A graphic of dice appears with arrows pointing to different segments. The top segment has text, N equals 30. It shows HIIT 3 to 4 times a week plus placebo COCO3, with an X next to the placebo. The next segment is labeled HIIT 3 to 4 times a week plus atorvastatin 80 mg per day, with a check mark next to atorvastatin. The next segment shows atorvastatin 80 mg per day with a check mark next to it. The last segment shows placebo COCO3 with an X next to it.
However, there's a study that is recently just been started, and this is a study in Europe. A lot of this research is happening in Europe, actually, not here. That examine the combined effect of statins and exercise on skeletal muscle mitochondrial content and function. And so they're going to randomize people, this study is ongoing, to placebo, atorvastatin, as well as exercise, and with a 2x2 factorial design. And you can see that what they're looking for is to understand whether the patients who are taking the statin are really benefiting from the exercise as well as the patients who are not. So it'll be very interesting to see the result of this study.
Slide. The 2 stick figures reappear. The right-hand side figure has 3 pill bottles pointing to the brain, the stomach, and the leg muscles. The network of blue and red lines appears between them again, with the dots on the ends of the blue and red lines next to each other.
Now, let's look at another approach.
The dots separate. Three pictures appear at the top of the slide, one showing a woman practicing yoga on a mat, the next showing several fruits, vegetables, eggs, and fish, and the last showing a woman running on a trail.
Imagine the same patient who is presenting with the same elevation of lipids, but who is now saying, well, okay, let's start you on a program of exercise and stress management and a diet and see what happens.
The dots move close together again. An arrow appears from less healthy state pointing to healthier state.
And you can see that the person may come back 6 months later and not only have the triglycerides improved, but a lot of the whole network is now shifting back towards a more healthy state. Now, that's not difficult to imagine, but it's harder to measure because typically we don't measure a lot of very different types of biomarkers, and frankly we don't understand very well yet how they interact altogether. This is where there's a program called Bridge to AI. It's a common fund program that's going to look at exactly this, where they're going to measure a lot of different, very, very extensive phenotyping in individuals who are pre-diabetic, who are managed with either lifestyle intervention versus drugs. And so it'll be very important, very interesting to see what happens there.
Slide. Two different red and blue lined networks appear, one labeled healthier state with the two dots close together, and the other labeled less healthy state with the dots apart. An arrow points from the healthier state to the less healthy state, with text, pathogenesis.
And the concept of moving from a healthier state to a less healthy state is called pathogenesis, right? That's how we understand how disease happens. But what is the reverse of that, right?
The arrow reverses, pointing from less healthy state to healthier state, labeled salutogenesis and a question mark above it.
Is the process of moving from a less healthy state to a healthier state? What is the mechanism of this? We know nothing about this. We don't understand. We don't know whether it's the pathogenesis in reverse, or are there other pathways that need to be activated in order for an individual to return to health? We don't know this. We really need to understand this better.
Slide. Three different blue and red-lined networks appear. One network has two dots apart with an arrow labeled with a pill bottle pointing to a network with dots close together, and a red oval surrounding some of the lines, a question mark beside it. Text, side effects, adverse effects, off-target effects. Another line points from the first network to another network with dots close together, and a green oval surrounding several lines that are now spread out, with a question mark beside the network. The line is labeled with the pictures of the woman practicing yoga, the veggies, fruits, eggs, and fish, and the woman running. Text, whole person health effects, salutogenic off-target effects.
Now, if you compare the two approaches, right, the pharmacological approach where you have a very precise target, and you have that can be improved by the drug, but yet is accompanied by off-target effects, which are typically recognized as adverse effects, which are tolerated because we're so focused on ameliorating the target, versus a whole person health approach where your off-target effects may actually be beneficial as opposed to harmful. So this is where understanding salutogenesis, why that's so important.
The slide with the two models appears, with low dose highlighted.
Let's now move on to the dose.
Slide. An article from Free Radical Biology and Medicine appears, published by Elsevier. Title, Hormetic Shifting of Redox Environment by Pro-Oxidative Resveratrol Protects Cells Against Stress. Annabelle Bloth, Ann Jagowski, Suzanne Sitchin, Sylvia J. Warrow, Linda Legions, Morton Russo, Christopher Wiedner, Lusford, Magdalena Kleem, Gail Jenkins, Silvina Latito, Linda J. Wainwright, Sasha Sauer. A chart labeled Hormetic Effects of RSV appears. The vertical axis is labeled viability percentage, and the horizontal axis labeled RSV concentration. With greater RSV concentration, viability percentage increases. The hormetic zone is the label for 0 to slightly before 100 for RSV concentration. RSV stays above 100% viability, then dips with greater concentrations. RSV plus 25 mm GSH shows viability rise, dip, then rise again with greater concentrations. The next graph is labeled effective 50 mm RSV on superoxide generation and H2O plus 44 mm NaHCO3. It shows a reduction in fold change versus vehicle over time. There is also a bar chart labeled relative expression of glutathione metabolism marker genes after 50 mm RSV for 16 hours. It shows high relative expression for GCLC and GPX3, lower relative expression for GPX1 and GSR, and medium amounts of relative expression for GSTA4 and GSTZ1.
This is a very interesting concept now called hormesis, which has been around now for decades. But people are just starting to understand how to investigate this. This again is a study from Europe, from Sweden, where they looked at a resveratrol, which is what generally believed to be an antioxidant. And when they looked at a range of doses, they found that at low doses, the effect of resveratrol on the viability of cells was opposite to that of the same compound used at a higher dose. And what they found is that the lower dose, the resveratrol was actually acting as a pro-oxidant, not as a mild pro-oxidant. And what it was doing is it was inducing the cells to produce their own antioxidant response, such as glutathione enzymes that control glutathione metabolism.
Slide. A graphic shows a molecular structure with squiggly arrows pointing down at cells. 2 arrows point from it to the left and right. The left arrow points to mild oxidative stress with a diagram showing an oval shape pointing to a triangle and a rhombus shape with 2 pentagonal shapes beneath the triangle and 2 hexagonal shapes beneath the rhombus. Text, transcription of target genes, GCLC, NQ01, G6PDA DNA structure is shown with a hexagon labeled NRF2 and a circle labeled P. This points to a cell structure at the bottom and also to the right-hand side. An arrow points from the structure back to itself labeled UV. Another arrow points in a curve labeled HNE. Another curved arrow is labeled ROS. The right arrow from the first molecular structure points to text, energy metabolism shift/redox environment shift. In a diagram, glucose points down to G6P, which points right to PPP, and R5P. G6P also points down to glycolysis, which points down to pyruvate, which also has an up arrow next to it, which in turn points to lactate. Beneath PPP is a cycle with NADP- pointing to NADPH, which points back to NADP-. Below that cycle is a cycle where GSSG points to GSH with an up arrow, which then points back to GSSG. PPP points right to R5P, which points down to plus NAM, which points down to NAD with an up arrow. Beneath this diagram is a structure labeled TCA with 2 arrows in a cycle. Text, relative oxygen consumption, with a down arrow. This all points down to the bottom cell structure.
And so their conclusion from their study is that resveratrol actually at a low dose can induce a mild oxidative stress, which induces an energy metabolic shift to a more sort of resilient response of the cell. And they're proposing that, in fact, that we're using antioxidants in the wrong way. Instead of using them at high doses, where they would act themselves as basically dumping antioxidants into the system, you could use them at a lower dose where you're inducing the body's own antioxidant protective responses. And this is something that we're starting to look at.
Slide. On the left-hand side of the slide is a graph with a vertical axis with labels from bottom to top: accelerated aging, typical aging, and optimal aging. The horizontal axis has labels from left to right: underexposure to stressors, ideal exposure, hormetic stress, and overexposure, toxic stress. Beneath these labels is label, dose/intensity over the lifetime. A curve rises from underexposure to stressors, plateauing in the middle at ideal exposure and optimal aging, and descending with overexposure. The ascent is labeled stress rejuvenescence. The descent is labeled stress acceleration. A picture to the right of the graph shows a cracked bowl where the cracks have been filled in with gold.
The concept of hormesis is really interesting because it can apply to so many things. We are understanding now in the stress literature that small amounts of stresses, such as, for example, exposing your body to cold temperatures. Probably all heard of these cold plunges that people do, dunking into taking a cold shower or something like that. Of course, not to excess, but can boost immune responses. But when you overexpose the body to stress, it becomes toxic. So stress exposure can also have this kind of hormetic, and the idea here, this is an image of Japanese art of a bowl that's broken and repaired with gold, where the bowl is actually more beautiful than before it was broken. And the idea that some amount of stress can be beneficial to us from all kinds of, from a biological, from a behavioral, from an even a spiritual dimension, that are accumulating stresses over our lifetime can make us stronger. So this whole adage of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger may apply here.
The slide with the two models appears again, with longer-term adaptive/protective/preventive effects highlighted.
So now, finally, let's look at sort of the duration of effects, longer-term adaptive, protective, preventive effects. What do we mean by that?
Slide. Text. Resilience. A graph has a vertical axis labeled outcome measure and a horizontal axis labeled time. A flat line labeled normal function appears toward the top. It dips with a chronic stressor over time, continuously descending. Another path shows it continuing in a flat line, dipping sharply with an acute stressor, and then rising again into 3 lines labeled grow, recover, adapt, or the dip being avoided with a dashed line labeled resist. These options all appear within a dashed box labeled resilience.
The concept of resilience is very important here, and this is something we've been working on in Office of Dietary Supplements. Has been a leader in this area in research on resilience. Understanding, this is the definition of the research. There was a working group on resilience that published this wonderful definition of the ability to adapt, recover, grow, resist, adapt, recover, or grow from a challenge, be it an acute or a chronic stressor.
Slide. Text. Ability to resist of stressor, homeostasis. A picture appears of Claude Bernard 1813 to 1878. A picture of a book cover appears. Title: Les Concepts de Claude Bernard sur le milieu intérieur. A picture on the right-hand side appears of a Walter Cannon, 1871 to 1945. A book cover appears with title, The Wisdom of the Body, Walter B. Cannon.
And of course, this is something that we've known for a long time, right? The whole concept of homeostasis, to the ability of the body to return to equilibrium. We've known this for a century, right? For example, when you go outside and in a cold environment, your ability of your body to return to body temperature, and the same thing when you're exposed to heat.
Slide. Text. Ability to recover from a stressor, resolution. A diagram appears labeled injury. A barrier break, tissue injury or trauma occurs, leading to a vascular response, which leads to PGE2 or PGI2. Microbes appear and lead small dots labeled chemoattractants. Another diagram shows text, dietary omega-3 fatty acids EPA, the. This points to neutrophils and pro-resolving mediators, with a line pointing to the right. From this line extends another line up to pro-inflammatory mediators with a box with text, failed resolution, chronic inflammation, fibrosis. Source Sirhan Sian, Nature 2014.
But there are also more complex mechanisms that we're starting to understand, where if your body is injured beyond simply a simple resisting, but where your body is stressed, for example, during an injury, how does the body recover from an injury? And we're starting to understand that there are mechanisms that some of them, for example, are pro-resolving mechanisms that help the body to turn off inflammation. It's not just ending the inflammation, but it's inducing the process of repair, of cleaning up the mess, of protecting the body so that the inflammatory response does not continue forever and hurt the individual. Some of these omega-3 derived what we call pro-resolving molecules are some of this research is a little controversial right now because it's difficult to measure, but it's undeniable that there are very specific processes in the body that are dedicated to resolving inflammation. And it's very important that we understand this.
Slide. Text. How can we best promote and support recovery after an injury? A graph with a curve appears with pain at the beginning of the curve and pain resolution at the descent of the curve. An arrow points to the pain resolution portion with text, gentle movement, tissue manipulation, nutrition, cognitive reframing, emotional self-regulation, stress management, sleep. Below this arrow is a diagram with a large box labeled systemic environment, with a smaller box labeled peripheral tissue environment with a cycle with 3 arrows, one labeled structural, pointing to an arrow labeled metabolic, pointing to an arrow labeled mechanical, which points back to structural. A picture shows red blood cells moving in a channel, with a line pointing to a system connecting to the brain labeled pain and another box labeled neuropsychosocial environment.
So what about resolving pain? Well, same thing, right? Say you have an injury. You can, it's very important, obviously, that we have analgesics to treat pain in the acute stage. But what about pain during the resolution phase, during healing? And we're starting to understand that recovering from an injury is extremely important, not just to provide analgesics to resolve the pain, to reduce the pain temporarily, but help the pain to resolve so it doesn't become chronic. Because there's a lot of problems when pain does not resolve after an injury. And the idea that to promote pain resolution, we need to understand how better to apply both a whole person approach to this, attending to not to all the psychological aspects, to emotional self-regulation, stress management, sleep. That's all very important in order to resolve pain. But also, for example, say you have an injury of a joint, restoring movement to the joint, manipulating the joint, and also paying attention to nutrition. These are all components that we need to understand better as how to promote. And why is that? We need to pay attention to the structural, mechanical, and metabolic environment of.
Slide. A graph shows a line labeled acute injury that becomes a curve with the rise of the curve labeled acute pain, the plateau and decline of the curve labeled convalescence, and a dashed flat line after it labeled pain resolution. A picture of a healthy joint is shown at the end, with a stick figure standing on one leg with arms outstretched. A line below this shows acute injury leading to a rise labeled acute pain with a line afterward labeled chronic pain, with no descent. At the end of the line is a stick figure holding a crutch with a joint with cartilage degeneration shown.
We lost your voice again, Helene.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
Oh, you're back. Okay.
Okay. And the video went away too. If you do not resolve pain, the function of the joint, for example, may not return, which would predispose you to developing degenerative diseases in the long term. So this is all really, really important.
Slide. Text. Acute to chronic transition, e.g. COVID-19. A horizontal axis labeled time appears, with two lines. The top line has a flat part labeled normal function, then a dip and a rise back to normal labeled convalescence, followed by a flat line labeled recovery. The bottom line has a flat part labeled normal function as well, followed by a dip with a flat line with no rise back to normal. This dip and ensuing flat line is labeled post-acute syndrome.
And I'm mentioning the concept of recovery and convalescence. This is something that we are really neglecting in medicine in general. We are seeing this, an example of this in the acute to chronic transition can occur not just with an injury, but can also with any illness. COVID-19 is a great example of this, right? We know that some individuals would contact, COVID in infection, would recover and would not have prolonged symptoms, where others do and develop long COVID. And we still have really very little understanding of why that is.
Slide. Text. The lost art of convalescence. 3 pictures appear. The first is a Victorian-era painting of a woman lying on a bed with a doctor standing nearby and a woman sitting in a chair at her side. The next picture is an excerpt from a book called Cooking of Vegetables. Text. Use of vegetables for the sick. Let the doctor select the vegetables to be given, then follow directions very carefully. A general rule is that the green vegetables, served crisp, may be allowed occasionally, but more often should be given boiled, strained, and warmed either in a cream soup, see page 20, or as a vegetable with hot milk, slightly thickened. Spinach. Wash very thoroughly, place in kettle without water, cover, place on back of stove, heat slowly until juice begins to cook out, then bring to front of stove and cook in its own juice until very tender. Chop fine, season, and serve. Carrots. These are very wholesome for well persons. Wash, scrape, cook in boiling salted water, serve mashed or in a cream sauce. Cabbage. This is inexpensive and very wholesome, served shredded, raw, or boiled with a cream sauce. The last picture shows a hospital with several rooms in a row and beds sitting outside the open rooms. Nurses stand by patients.
But if you go back to the old literature and old textbooks and even novels from the 18th, 19th century, people paid a lot of attention to that convalescence phase. You paid attention to rest and sleep and diet and what to eat. And we hardly pay attention to that anymore. I think that this is really something that we need to, understand how to support the recovery after an illness, paying attention to the nutrition and physical and psychological aspects of whole person health.
Slide. Text. NCCIH/ODS Consortium for Advancing Research on Botanical and Other Natural Products, in parentheses, Carbon, Program. Titles appear. Text, Dietary Botanical Supplements on Biological and Behavioral Resilience, Giulio Maria Passanetti, Ph.D., from Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Botanicals Enhancing Neurological and Functional Resilience in Aging, Amala Soumyanath, Ph.D., from Osu's Benfro Botanical Dietary Supplements Research Center. Spirulina-derived oral supplements in promoting resilience against viral infections, Ikhlas Khan, Ph.D., from University of Mississippi Botanical Dietary Supplements Research Center.
So, you know, as far as research on resilience, we're very fortunate that we're starting to understand programs that are dedicated to this. We're delighted that all three programs in the current version of the Carbon program are focusing on resilience. And this is great. It's a great start.
Slide. Text, Rethinking Our Approach to Research on Nutrition and Natural Products in the Context of Whole Person Health. Bullets, Single Target, Pharmacological Dose, Immediate/Short-Term Effects, Multi-System Effects, Low Dose/Hormesis, Longer-Term Adaptive/Protective/Preventive Effects.
But I want to remind all of you that we're kidding ourselves if we think that a single molecule is going to is going to lead to resilience. It's got to be a whole lot more complicated than that.
Barbara Sorkin appears.
We need to understand how best to use natural products in order to improve resilience, but we're going to have to understand how they work in the whole context of the whole body, the whole person, multi-system effects, understanding the effects of different doses, and also understanding their effects over the course of a long period of time, including prevention of illness. And this is research that's tricky to do. But we need to be very cognizant of the challenges ahead and meet them. I think that the focus of the current administration, the government administration on chronic diseases is very apt, very important. And I think that we can meet the challenge of addressing the epidemic of chronic diseases by really looking at whole person health as a way to get there.
Slide. Text. Questions. A graphic of a raised hand appears.
So I want to stop here and happy to address. I'm going to stop my sharing and happy to address any questions.
Barbara Sorkin.
Thanks so much for that great presentation. Lots of comments to that effect in the chat as well, Elaine. And yes, we will be making the recording available, I believe. So, let's see, going back, the resveratrol study that you showed, do you know what the source of that, by any chance, what the source of that resveratrol was? Somebody asks whether it was from Polygonum cuspidatum.
Well, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can certainly find out. And the reference is in
on the slide, I think. Yeah.
In the slide, so you can. I cannot say that off the top of my head. Sorry.
Scrolling backwards, some words of concern about the rat statin study and concentrations, and whether those translated to human statin use.
On which study was taught about the statins?
I think the rat statin study that I thought was very interesting, where there was an adverse effect on modulation of mitochondrial number and activity. But statins.
Yeah. No, I don't know this dose was on the high side, I think. So I think it's very important that when they do the study in humans, because that's essentially where the bottom line is going to be in that study in humans. The whole statin story is very confusing, right? If you look at statin myopathy, there's at one end of the spectrum, you have the sort of rhabdomyolysis and, muscle damage, etc. Not very many people develop that. There's a lot of people who develop these vague myalgias that are very common, even people who don't have statins. So when people compared a statin with placebo, they were not able to show any difference in myopathy. And that's one of the reasons why statins are recommended. And so, but I think that if you look at the literature, there's over and over again, people have shown that there are effects of statins. They've shown in cell cultures, some in animal studies, and all, it's not. It would be very, very surprising if you block the pathway to cholesterol synthesis and not have any effects. I know the body has a lot of workarounds and different pathways to get around this, but I really, from my own personal standpoint, I think the jury is still out about whether or not there are other effects that we may not be aware of. So it's not just for statins. I'm not just picking on statins just because of one thing, any drug for that matter. Once we start looking at metabolic pathways and we have the ability to look at a whole physiome, of a person in a much more extensive way, I think if we have the courage to look at some of these adverse drug effects, or even, adverse or not, drug effects, I think we're going to find a lot more metabolic derangements than we care to look at right now. I think we want to really explore that. I think it's going to be very, very important.
Yeah, and yes, throw a gear into homeostasis at your peril, right?
Exactly.
And thank you for that wonderfully cogent case for the importance of multi-component interventions. Better than I've been making it, I think. So a question, well, first of all, a shout out and thank you from Drew Bremer for referring to the ONR strategic plan, which is super exciting that that's out. And a question from my ODS colleague, Johanna Dwyer, about food addiction, and whether you could hum a few more bars about that. What's the evidence for that? And yes,
sorry,
Johanna,
my
sound some evidence. No, it's me. I'm sorry. It's my internet. Let me stop my camera and see if that's better. Food addiction. What's the evidence base for food addiction? She also asked about flavonoids and effect on vascular resilience. And yes, Johanna, I can give you some data on that. But I think there's some good data. But food addiction, Helene, could you say a few more words about that in the evidence base?
Well, food addiction, I mean, this is something we don't really know what the role of the food itself is, right? There may be foods that are being developed, like, for example, additives in that are part of developing the food that are being tested in order so that people eat more of them. We know that food companies do this, that they'll test them in the lab with potato chips or something, and they'll change the flavoring of it in order to induce people to eat more. I mean, that's not a secret. And that's how they sell more of it. So now, how does increased consumption of something turn into an addiction is another, there's one thing about over-consuming and it's another thing about being addicted. So this is where these mechanisms, in the brain that control our responses to emotional responses have to do with triggering, for example, eating in response to stress. So this is very complicated. And so, but it's very similar to the other types of responses that people have when they're addicted to other types of things. It's not just for food. So I think that by understanding better the effects that, say, for example, the GLP-1 agonist drugs have on one of the first things that people describe is that they're craving less food. And the craving for, say, an opiate, a drug, and the craving for, cigarette or, a bag of potato chips, there's a relationship there. But again, it's how that behavior becomes, impairs somebody's, ability to function, et cetera. There's a whole gradient of that. So it's not black or white. But there's definitely an aspect of understanding the components, how the components of the food that we eat influence these types of behaviors. I think it's a very important thing to understand.
And it would be really interesting to learn more, which I hope we will be doing, about the role of the gut microbiota and all of that.
Yeah,
but
right. Absolutely.
A question from Lori Dons at NHLBI. How do you see the role of prescription type medications in whole person health?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so here's this, on that continuum from health to disease, once a disease is diagnosed and once there starts to be, some, serious pathophysiology, of course you need to treat it, right? It's where is that line? So, for example, with the diabetes, I mean, we know that once they're past a certain point, if you do not treat diabetes, you need to, because this is where it starts to affect the organs, and it would just be a very bad idea not to treat it. On the other hand, there may be a period of time before the disease has become fixed and manifested, that where the metabolic abnormalities are more labile. We call this, some people call it pre-diabetes, but it can just be simple, lack of reduced glucose tolerance. At that point, especially if there are as concomitant obesity, weight gain, for example, and importantly, psychological stress. If the person is under stress, addressing that can be very helpful, helping the person sleep. This is, I think, a very underappreciated aspect of things. We know that chronic stress affects glucose metabolism. It affects immune function. It affects blood pressure. It affects so many things that are components of chronic diseases at an early stage. So addressing stress, sleep, exactly. So by simply helping an individual to have a better night's sleep, first of all, they'll have more energy the next day. They'll have more energy to go and get their exercise, go to the grocery store, buy the food, cook it. If you don't have a good night's sleep, all that is out the window. So this is why paying attention to all three legs of the stool, psychological, physical, and nutritional, together, is so important. That's whole person
health. So lots of requests from our 200-ish attendees for your presentation, but I think that's a perfect note to end on. So thanks so much, Helene. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye.